Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Neglect Matters campaign. This 1-hour lunch and learn session will focus on domestic abuse as child abuse and the impact of neglect through a presentation by our colleague Sue at East Surrey Domestic Abuse Services. The session will begin with a foreword by Detective Chief Superintendent Sailesh Limbachia, our Head of Public Protection from Surrey Police. And today's session will also include an animated personal story and a video presentation from our GCP2 project manager. The Academy training offers on neglect can be found on the final slides, and links will be posted in the Q&A available to attendees. The format of the Teams live session is such that you cannot verbally interact with the presenters, but please do feel free to send any questions through the Q&A option. These will be collated at the end of the session and answers sent out to you. We would encourage you all to not just listen to these sessions, but to use this information to help us all improve the lives of children, young people and their families in Surrey. Thank you very much. Sailesh.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much. I do apologise, I'm having technical issues. So yes, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's Lunch and Learn session on behalf of the Surrey Safeguarding Children's Partnership in relation to neglect. This is such an important area, something that is really close to my heart, and as one of the senior leaders within policing, we are working extremely hard so that our frontline officers and our investigators are able to identify and deal with neglect. But it's not just a single agency response. We can only really truly effectively make a huge impact and improve the outcomes of children and their families if we work as an entire partnership. Now, whether you're a statutory agency or from the voluntary sector, we all have got a part to play in this. And this is such an important opportunity for us today to get together to talk about neglect, and more so around the impact of domestic abuse upon children. We know that children suffer in silence and that they need someone to be able to be their eyes and ears for them. They can't care for themselves, and at times they rely on agencies such as us, such as all of you here now this afternoon, to be able to be there for them, to look after them. So for me, neglect is such an important topic area. We really need to understand and deal with neglect. What the signs are, what to look out for, it's really important. So today's session, I am so grateful for the partnership to put the presentation on today, and I really hope that you all find it useful and that we, all of us collectively as one team, can make a huge difference and improve the outcomes for children and families. So thank you, and a huge welcome to you all.
Hi everybody, can you hear me? Is that all okay? Yeah, grand. So as you've just heard, my name's Sue and I work at East Surrey Domestic Abuse Service. My colleague Lucy was going to join us today as well because she's also in the children's service team at ESDAS. Unfortunately, she's unwell, so you got me for the duration. So what we wanted to go through today was looking at the coexistence of domestic abuse and child neglect. So the aims of the session, we want to explore the context of that. We're going to look at a case study and to put that into a context so that it's sort of try to make sense of it. Consider the impact that domestic abuse has on parenting capacity, with a view to really highlighting this area of victim blame that we come across so often. And also to encourage during the presentation some reflective thinking around professional curiosity that sometimes get a bit sidelined, and really being more trauma informed. So that's what we hope to do. So next slide, please. So really, to set the scene on where we're at, we just wanted, as I say, put it into a case study. So I just want to give you a bit of a situation so that we can go from there. So if we consider, and this is a typical type of family situation that we come across so often. So there's a mum and 3 children that have fled domestic abuse from another county, and they've fled into Surrey and get rehoused in temporary accommodation into a 2-bed place. Mum has suffered from all types of domestic abuse, so the whole spectrum, at the hands of the children's father, but she's also had previous relationships which have also been abusive. She has multiple medical needs, physical and mental health needs. Whilst in Surrey, she's had to go under hospital investigations for autoimmune diseases and things like that. And so she often finds herself housebound, sometimes bedbound. And the children obviously she has to work with children around that. She takes medication for asthma and depression, dips in and out, low moods, things like that. She's got signposted to a local children's centre in her area, and the children initially started going to different schools, which was problematic for her. She's got 3 children, but that then got resolved in that they could put the children all in one school. They went under a TAF. And then as a result of that, the children's centre referred to ESDAS adult outreach team so that mum could get some support to try and start to make sense of the domestic abuse she suffered and to support her in this newfound situation. From there, it was recognised that there were sort of early help needs, but it was being managed under this TAF situation. A few months go on from that, and she's getting whatever support she could, and then we find out that a partner has moved in to this flat with her and 2 of his children. So now we're in a situation of a 2-bed property with 5 children. So mum and partner in one room, 5 children in the other room. The ages of these children range from 3 to 9, so quite a handful. What has been seen outside of the home, and we're in lockdown as well at this point. So what was being seen, because the children were accessing school as they were deemed to be vulnerable, was that the partner, who mum was saying had come from this other county she'd fled from, and she'd known him for a while. Apart from that, not a lot else was known. But he was supporting, taking the children to school, collecting them, helping mum with their medical needs, things like that. What also then came to light was mum had then found out that biological dad, which she'd fled from, was then seeking a child arrangement order to see his children. So that was bubbling around in the background of it all. So that basically sets the scene of where we were, or where we are with it. So from this TAF situation, the GP, because she had to link with her GP for her medical needs, but of course records and things weren't known because of the cross-county working. From there, it was decided that from the presentation of the children, or the oldest child in particular, a referral needed to go to CAMHS. So 2 of the children were referred into CAMHS by the GP, and our adult outreach worker thought that the children could benefit from our children's service work on trauma. So those are the referrals that were being made from there. And the concerns that were identified in the referrals, I'll read you because these were quotes from the actual referrals. So for the oldest child, the referral said he wakes in the night screaming, says he hears voices and sees a man telling him to kill his mother, has suicidal thoughts, inconsistent emotional support due to non-engagement by the mother. For the middle child, we has no sense of danger, will run off, sit in the road, has made himself sick, resulting in time off school. He defecates inappropriately and smears feces on walls, refuses to wear socks and shoes, has OCD and sensory issues, and learning below expectations. And for the youngest child, who's infant school age, wets the bed and is unable to have any door closed in the home, having previously been dragged downstairs by her father and been locked in her bedroom in the dark. Full dental extraction completed, chin is split open in the bath, and learning below expectations. And then on all of them, it had that the children regularly use internet with no parental supervision. So that was the referrals. That's where we were with that. So the responses from services that got these referrals were for CAMS. They made contact with mum and had some suggestions with the children, but what they wanted to see, knowing that we had had the referrals as well, they wanted to see us do some therapeutic intervention to explore the trauma prior to them taking on any further work with them, which actually is something that happens. School put in school nurse for the middle child who had these deemed medical issues around the sensory stuff and soiling and things like that. There was a teaching assistant that was put into class. Because of the way the birth dates were with the eldest child and the middle child, they actually were in the same class. So there was only one class per year group, so they couldn't put them in different classes. And one was born in an August and one was born in a September. So it just meant that with the school year, they'd ended up in the same year group. That had its own set of issues with the eldest child needing to protect this middle one, who constantly got highlighted because of the difficulties he faced with having to take his shoes off and needing to rush to the toilet and things like that. The children's centre, who was leading the TAF, was offering family support. So whatever was available there, but obviously during lockdown, not a lot was going on and nobody was going to visit the children at home. So it was limited what could be offered there. So our adult outreach team from ESDAS would continue to offer the support to mum because there were constant triggers for her in relation to the children's behaviour. If one was being particularly aggressive, what she was seeing was dad. So there was lots of talk around whether or not mum could access counselling through us or what was going to be available for her. And then we obviously got involved to see what could be offered for the children. And at the time, what mum wanted was work for the older child who had all these hearing voices and was feeling quite suicidal, because she felt that the middle child had school nursing or whatever that was going on at school. And the little one was deemed not to really, was a bit hidden, despite the fact that they're wetting the bed and all these other things are going on. So the consent for us was, can you work with the older one? So Lucy, my colleague, tried to set that up and managed to do one session with this lad in school before mum decided that no, she was going to withdraw the consent. And so we couldn't continue that work. All of this for us, looking at it through a DA lens, completely flagged what is going on in this house. We don't know anything about this new partner. We know that biological dad's on the warpath in the background. So what can we do? So because of the disengagement from mum, the children's centre then felt that they couldn't continue with the TAF. So it was basically just going to be left and closed. So we then went back to CSPA and said, we need to get something going on here, because the TAF in the beginning, it was there with the professionals felt needed, so they wouldn't take it up. But then following that, again, they felt that no, there isn't anything further that they could do because everybody was involved doing their bit. But then Lucy persevered and she managed to get it into a MAP inquiry, which was then identified as level 4 intervention. And that was, we think, as a result of the person that took it on and was listening to it, actually, in a previous life, was an IDVA, which is an independent domestic violence advisor. So had a good knowledge of domestic abuse and potentially was seeing things that thought this needs looking at. However, following on from that, mum was contacted, and then whoever picked it up from there then decided, no, it goes to early help. And then following the conversation with mum, who had minimised everything, and no, it's all okay. Still, we've had nobody going round to the house to actually see what's going on there, and nobody exploring what's happening with this new partner. So to the outside world, it looked like she was supported, she had her medical needs being met, the children had sort of someone looking at them doing something, so it was just closed. So that's where we were with it. What we've since found out, actually, is that mum has now taken the children out of school, and now we don't know where they are. So it doesn't paint a great picture, but actually that sort of fits with where we're at. Sorry, can we move on the slides? I forgot to move them on. And again. And again. That was one I've just read out. So if we think about the domestic abuse, what that does, how that embeds, if we're thinking of mum and we're thinking of where she's at with what's her belief system, bearing in mind we don't know really much about her childhood, whether she grew up in a difficult situation, what the attachment styles are like for her, but we do know that she's had several domestic abuse relationships. So in her belief system, she may well be thinking, I'm a rubbish parent. These are all narratives that are so often put there by perpetrators, and that's all about gaining this power and control and using that coercive control to get their needs met. So she may well be thinking, well, I've been told women are weak and helpless, incompetent, stupid or violent. She's unlovable because she may have well have been told, well, you're rubbish, so you're a rubbish parent, you're a rubbish lover, you know, nobody else is going to want you, you're stuck with me, that type of thing. There's only two choices in this life, you're either an aggressor or you're a victim. Children will be taken away, that's another classic one that sits there. It's this unhealthy, unequal relationships are normal and to be expected. Because if that gets normalised, because it just happens so often and they have to find a way of managing it, then it becomes the norm. So it's difficult to comprehend what something more healthy would look like. Women don't have the right to be treated with respect. And if that sits there, they won't be expecting anybody to treat them with any respect. I won't be believed. And in fact, in this mum's story, it was quite shocking at times to hear what she was saying. So I think she felt that, well, nobody's going to believe what I'm going to tell them because they just think that doesn't happen to people. I have mental health issues and can't cope. So because she was struggling with all of that as a result of all of her experiences, and what we know from research is all the physiological elements that come out from very traumatic life events. So she had these fibromyalgias. She was being looked at, investigated for lupus. Is it lupus? Which is an autoimmune situation as well. So, and the other one on here, men are in charge and get to control women's lives. So if those are messages that are there, you imagine meeting this mum or speaking to this mum, she's going to be holding on. These are her beliefs. This is what she feels that people are going to judge her on. Next slide, please. I'm finding notes as we're doing it. So how does that impact on her parenting capacity? So she's come out of relationships that are very controlling, emotionally and psychologically scarring. There was physical stuff as well. Well, it was the whole spectrum. Financially, she was controlled. Sexually, she was controlled. It was everything, physically, everything. So what is it we're looking at? We're thinking of parenting capacity and what is good enough. So under sort of items of basic care, when we think of coercive control and where it fits with neglect, for these mums, it can be in the household. It might be something like they're not allowed to go and brush their children's hair. They're not allowed to help their children tie shoelaces. It could be things like that because the perpetrator is going to want the attention on them. You're spending too much time on that child. They can do it for themselves. I need you. So they are denied being able to be the parent they want to be, and it's at the consequence of the child. So that child may well be turning up to school with matted hair or teeth uncleaned, whatever it may be. Sometimes it might get noticed, sometimes it doesn't. but it can be that level, that basic level, that parent, that non-abusive parent, isn't allowed to do. So if we think about the ensuring the safety and the distorted views of managing the situation, when that survivor is trying to survive in the situation of coercive control, they literally are managing a situation that to anybody else would be deemed as, well, that's not appropriate. That can't be happening. So the distortion of the views is that in order to keep the safety for the children, they might have to put things in place that look like, well, that isn't healthy and that's not appropriate. And so therefore we're going to blame you, mum, for doing that. But really what she's doing is just trying to ensure that safety, because if mum's not safe, those children aren't safe. And it's a flawed policy to consider that, you know, if something happens to mum, so if she can't protect herself because the perpetrator is controlling her, then she's not going to be able to control safeguard those children. So if we think of emotional warmth, what happens with the coercive control is it's numbing. You'll get a survivor that will sit in that place of they're not allowed to be emotionally warm. So they've had to learn, how do I survive this situation? I have to numb myself. So the finding empathy towards a child and the child's needs is really hard, because it's all about the demands from the perpetrator for the mum's attention. So that can be, as I say, that could be at the expense of the child. So where we're looking for that mum to meet the children's needs and to be available for them, they may well want to do that, and they're caught in this complete place of not being able to do it. So that's sort of where it sits in a slightly different thing than just sort of saying, oh, this mum hasn't, you know, can't cope and hasn't got it and, you know, isn't a good mum. So if we think of the stimulation, and there's limited opportunities for that. I mean, I've heard it so many times from children where they'll say things like, oh, it was great, I was able to watch the film with mum, but I was only able to do that because dad had gone out, and we can only do it when dad's out, because as soon as dad comes back, it's his way, no way, and that's it. We all have to fit in with what works for him. So it's limited to when maybe that mum can play with the children and just generally be available to them. The guidance and the boundaries, that is so often sabotaged, and the goalpost moves. So what works one day is not going to work the next day. So how can they create stability, consistency and predictability that we all know children need to feel safe in a home, when there's this changing of goalposts and the boundaries are all over the place? So often what happens if, say, a family goes into children's services and it goes under, say, a child protection situation, and they're all looking at, right, okay, mum, you need to put boundaries in, you know, this isn't good enough, you need to put boundaries in. So often perpetrators are the invisible ones and they're not there. So it's the non-abusive parent that often is the one facing all of these things. This needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, and mum, you need to do it. So when you've got a mum coming from that place of being coercively controlled, and in that place under the domestic abuse and all those tactics, holding those belief systems, and yet being expected to be this, you know, everything and all to everyone, when there's all that going on for her at that time from what's gone on around the domestic abuse. Next slide, please. So if we think more closely about coercive control, and it is the most common factor in murders, because it is the one thing that gives the most power and control. So when we think about it in children, and we'll have a little chat about the Domestic Abuse Act, which is now the legal bit around it all, what that recognises is that children are directly impacted by coercive control. So if we think, well, what does that look like? What does that mean? We've got a definition, we know what it is, but in reality, what it does is it controls the time and the movement of activities within the home. So, as I say, it's the patterns of behaviour that a perpetrator will put in place within a home that dictates what everybody else can do and can't do. So, and those change. That's the difficulty of it. It's fine 1 minute and it's not okay the next. So it's the routines, it's the rules. So often when I'm working with children, I might say to them, okay, so what's the rule in the home? What happens? Say it's pets or something. Who feeds the pets? What's the thing around the pets? And so often they will come up, oh no, it's whatever it is. It's always going to be whoever that perpetrator is. So often it's their dad. It's them. It's their rule. And that's what we have to do. So often children will say they're not allowed to play with toys. So very limited what toys they can have. Certainly nothing can be out when dad comes home from work, or they're not allowed to be messy, things like that. So whatever it is, it very much controls everything that happens in the home. For a mum in that, so a parent in that situation that's surviving this, that could look like meal times have to be certain ways, certain times. The moment it's not, there's a problem. It could be they have to have certain meals, certain ingredients. So the food shopping can be problematic. Imagine going to a shop and being told, I want this particular sauce for my pasta. And then the mum gets to the shop and they run out. The panic that goes in, and it's, well, I can't go home. I've got to go to every shop I could possibly go to get that, because the repercussion of not having it is dreadful. And it's that type of control that they're living with. And that's what the children are also seeing and living with and dealing with. So if we think about the constraints of the use of space and self-expression, there isn't any. It's completely constrained. Then I'd often hear as well, oh, I can't challenge, I can't say no. You know, so if we're thinking about, in fact, I've had a case just this week where a teenager is in children's services at the moment, and the work is, from their point of view, is trying to help her be able to say no to things from dad, rather than feel she's got to be at his beck and call and leave the house and go and see him whenever. But my question would be, how is it you think she's going to be able to do that when she's been directly coercively controlled? So she's not. So we get the emotional blackmail that comes into play. Well, if I don't see you on this time, you're going to ruin my whole day. From that level to, well, I'm going to kill myself. If you don't come here at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, I'm going to kill myself. The reality of that is that person, the responsibility of somebody else's life and mood is dependent on their behaviour. So it's that level of control and that manipulation, and it's living with that on a constant. It's wearing, exhausting. So we've got the regulation of speech and behaviour. Who do they say what to? Who do they trust? Because secrets, we all know they keep secrets, and the loyalties that they feel, the split loyalties between each parent. I can't tell my mum this is happening. I can't tell dad about mum. That responsibility for that child and the positioning that they're in is horrible. And then but they're trying to live it. It's almost like they're being sort of put into adult situations, and yet what they're hearing outside of that, maybe from professionals working with them, is, well, you need to be a child, you shouldn't have all this. Well, how can they not have it? Because it's been put there by that person that's perpetrating the coercive control. The narrowed space for action, it completely isolates them from sources of support, because you'll get that controlling parent that will be, no, you don't want them to be your friend, they're not a very good friend, or it's all mum's fault that we're not together, your mum's this, your mum's that. And so they start to withdraw from any support that they can be offered, and they're just being manipulated into that one area just to meet the needs of that perpetrator. So then we get the vigilant scanning and the monitoring of spaces, and that might look like the child in the classroom that can easily get labelled with ADHD, or are they hypervigilant? Are they the ones that are bobbing up and down and they can't keep still and they're forever disruptive, or they're looking out the window? They're likely to be looking for the white van that's going by, or is that dad coming, you know, or the car or something, or that figure that's just approached. They have dark hair. My dad's got dark hair. Is he found me? Is he in the school? What's he doing? and living again with that in your head constantly. Is my mum safe at home? I left her this morning. I don't know. Oh, I think she was going to court today. I wonder how it's gone. And yet they're the ones that may get in detention for not paying attention in class or not doing the work. It's how it is. You know, we've got children that say, I don't want to sit at the front of the class where I've been put because they think I'm not listening. I need to be at the back of the class because I can't cope with anything behind me because I don't know what's going on. If I sit at the back, I can view the scanning, I can view the whole room and see what everybody's doing, and therefore I can evaluate my own risk and my own safety. That on a daily basis for a child is awful. And so it's no wonder that they're so full with everything that, you know, it comes out in other forms, doesn't it? The concept of safe and risky spaces, areas in the home, times of day, all children must be seen and not heard. So do they have a space that they go to? Oh, dad's in, right, I know I better go to my room now, or I better be this place or that place, or I better be available. Dad says I've got to come and sit in that chair, so I need to be there at that time. It's all these rules and patterns of behaviour that are laid down by that person. And then they're the mini radars in the home. So striving for that predictability when we know it isn't. So constantly looking around, what can I do? What's going on? Next slide. So these are the types of roles that a child survivor can take on. So the one I was telling you about, the young girl that I talked about this week, she's very much a caretaker. So her position is she's in a bit of a no-win situation because she's caretaking for mum at home in terms of being mindful of mum's mood. I won't mention dad. I'll go out the room when dad calls because I know it's going to upset my mum. And she's got this loyalty going with dad. So she's caretaking for dad's mood. Oh, I'll try and cheer him up. I'll try and do this. I'll try and do that. The responsibility and the positioning that that young person has meant that she's got no time and no space for her own social life. Friendships are problematic because she feels nobody gets it. She feels she's constantly judged. So all of this is with her all the time. And if we think of in the case study, if we think of the older boy in there, he definitely is the caretaker in that house, monitoring what's going on, trying to keep it all together, managing all these other children. They can go into mother's confidant situation where they can be the one siding with mum and then going all along with what's happening there, or they could be the abuser's confidant, so taking on everything that's happening on that side. They could then end up being an abuser's assistant, and that's where you get the idea where they go off to contact and they come back and they're described as a little mini me in the home. So they're the ones that may as well be a little video camera going around because everything gets fed back to the abuser. He sends them there with the narratives, go and find this out, go and suss this out, tell me what's going on there, or go and behave the way I behave and be aggressive and be like me in the home, because they know that's going to trigger mum and they know that's going to be a difficulty for her. And the children will say the worst thing that the non-abusive parents, often mum, the worst thing that mum can say to them is, and they will say this, oh, you're just like your dad. And that is a real killer for the kids. It's just think I'm not my dad, you know, and that's the real thing, especially if they look like them as well. That's the added bit for them. Or you can get the perfect child, which I think in this case study we used was going on for the older boy again, because he was trying not to show and not to highlight any issues that are going on at home. So he completely internalized everything. Therefore, it was coming out in his voices in his head and him feeling he wasn't worthy of being around anymore. But at school, they didn't see an issue. All they saw was, well, he's doing very well in school, thank you. It's his brother who's got the medical issues that's under par with learning, and the little one. But actually, this older one, so therefore there can't be a problem at home. But they look like they're the perfect child to try and disguise the fact, and they don't want anybody to really see what's going on. We've got the referee, and they'll be the ones that jump in to try and rescue the situation. So they get caught in the middle of the arguments that are going on and often end up hurt because of what's happening there, and they're constantly trying to sort it out. Again, caretake, who do they side with, what do they do? Sometimes they could be scapegoated, and that can be where they're blamed. Well, if you hadn't have done this, then we wouldn't have had to have argued. So they already feel to blame, and again, they will often describe that it's my fault. You know, if I hadn't have said what I said at the time, then my mum wouldn't have got into bother later on that night. So that sort of gives a flavour of the types of roles that the children can take on. So we know a little bit about what narratives the mums had. Also, that's true of the children, because they'll be fed narratives that sit with a belief system about them. You know, I'm an unlikable friend, I'm unlovable, I'm to blame for this stuff. I've been rejected and abandoned because my dad's gone off. Therefore, you know, it must be my fault. And then they sit with all these roles. Next slide, please. So just a little bit on sort of considering the trauma-informed thing. I mean, I guess we all know about, you know, being trauma-informed and where practices are trying really hard to be trauma-informed. But this is just a bit of a flavour for some languages that I've heard when I've been into schools. And I've heard staff say, oh, they got ADHD. And like I said, that could look like ADHD when that child's in the class really struggling. Or is it that they are reacting to trauma? So something's got triggered and they're just reacting to their trauma that they've got. They could have post-traumatic stress disorder. Oh, they've got an anger management problem because they're aggressive and they're outward and they're feisty and they're all those things. Or they're having difficulty regulating their emotion. So it has a different, as I'm reading it, I can feel the difference in the flavour that comes out. And on the receiving end of it, you can imagine how a child will respond completely differently to somebody that's having that conversation with them in more like, oh, well, you get it. I'm going to relate with you and you're just blaming me as the problem. They're disruptive. No, they've been triggered. And this one happens with mums a lot. Oh, you've got poor coping skills. Especially with this mum, with all the mental health issues that she had, where you just can't cope. You can't cope with all these children. Or actually, does she have survival skills? So it's trying to recognise where the strengths are within it, and just having that different approach can be the key thing to maybe somebody engaging with you or not. So anyway, I'll leave that one on. That's on there. Next slide, please. So this is what's come out of DHRs and serious case reviews and things. These have been missed opportunities, and where we think of, we all hope we use professional curiosity, but sometimes it can get sidelined. And these are things that have come out from learnings from these serious cases. So overlooking the vulnerability, not being able to recognise the impact of the trauma, and minimising and denying the domestic abuse. So more seeing, was this a case of acrimonious parents, they need to bang their heads together, it's the children that are suffering because of the breakdown of their relationship? Or are we actually completely missing the coercive control that's going on and the manipulation that's going on and colluding with something quite different? So are we then minimising the risk of what is going on within that family in a domestic abuse context? Poor communication. Again, this is a bit of a two-way street. So is it that children's services, which has been known in these missed opportunities, are not seeking enough information from other agencies involved, who often will hold bigger bits of the jigsaw? Or is it that the other agencies aren't sharing that information? Whichever one it is, it's the poor communication. And that's resulted in not enough being known and in all being hidden. In the case study, the difficulty was that it was cross-county. So trying to get information, say you want it from another police force, trying to get that information, it's time related. So anything can happen in the space of time. Plus the fact it's, well, who do you go to? Trying to find that key worker. GP records take time to come through. So it's just all around that area. Not referring to MARAC. You know, where there is a doubt, with that professional curiosity, get to MARAC. Even if it's a conversation with somebody about, "Ooh, should I refer this or not?" It's worth having, because not enough is going to MARAC, and not enough. I think children's services attendance at MARAC is low. You know, so it's all well having it referred, but you need the people there to hear it. Not identifying the children at risk. And again, missing the coexistence of the domestic abuse and the neglect, and the children as direct victims of this stuff. And again, that can be seeing the neglect as maybe using an incident approach to it, rather than seeing what actually is behind what's going on, looking behind the behaviours really, and seeing what's leading to that, what's going on underneath. And again, that's the professional curiosity, isn't it? We all get that gut thing, don't we, about, oh, this doesn't feel right, something's not right here. And the collusion and the abusive process. So often, and we really try and help professionals with this, because it is a difficult one. Sometimes it happens. There can be a collusion with that perpetrator, because they are so clever at what they do. So we'll get the charm, we'll get the show of where they're doing everything right, and they're putting everything on the mum, because the mum is the one that's under mental health team, maybe using alcohol, taking drugs, whatever. But why is she doing that? What's going on for mum? What's the coping skills that she's using, the surviving skills to survive what's going on for her? So we can get this sort of misconceived collusion, which points the finger in the wrong direction. And then all the decision making around that is more in favour of perpetrator than it is the survivor. And then the parental alienation, that seems to be a big one, especially around family courts and child arrangement orders. We get that a lot, where again, the intimidation that's used in the court process to persuade, coerce others to take on that perpetrator's viewpoint. And you imagine that survivor has been through everything they've been through, and then the next thing is they've got to challenge this person in court, and they've got to basically defend themselves and say why they've gone through what they've gone through. They're in their belief system, you're unlovable, nobody will believe you, your children are going to be taken away. So they tend to sit back and allow all this stuff to happen, because the confidence, the assertiveness to be able to do that, they're crushed. So they won't have that capacity to be able to do it without the support. Next slide, please. So this is just something that I wanted to sort of look at in terms of what was being said in the Ofsted report, that it was the most common factor in the lives of children who need social care. A greater emphasis on tackling perpetrators. And this is something that so gets overlooked. They are the challenge. And actually, the situation with these families is only there because we've got perpetrators doing what they're doing. And this thing about frontline professionals laying blame on the victim, and this lack of the empathy gap and skills. So next slide, because there was an update on that. It was all getting improved, which is great news. There was still this over-optimism by professionals regarding parenting capacity to change or sustain improvements. So again, it's just raising awareness about what capacity does that person have given what they've been through, and what potentially post-separation is still going on. Next slide. So what we do have in our favour now is the DA Act, and there's a link that's going to come up for you guys, I think, to be able to link into the Home Office, which has got sort of quite a good way of showing the facts of like a fact sheet on the provisions in the Act. So we know that it recognises the devastating impact that domestic abuse has on children exposed in their own home. It very much brings the children to the forefront, which is great. And it shows that coercive control can be directly put onto the children. So they are victims and survivors in their own right. So it's not that they're just bystanders in the home, witnessing something. They're actually being impacted directly by it, which is great. And the key function for the DA Commissioner is to be able to encourage good practice in identification of children affected by domestic abuse. So there's going to be things put in to really help get that recognition and get the identification of it, rather than it get lost and go under the radar. So definitely worth looking at that. We know it's an act now and it's in legislation and it's all been royal assent and passed. However, the implementation of it in agencies and in the jurisdictional system is going to take time. So just for an instance around coercive control, at the moment it's a crime. Well, we know it's a crime. At the moment, it is still that if it's a couple that are in a relationship, we can call it coercive control, and that can be the crime. This DA Act brings in the idea of post-separation coercive control continuing on, but at the moment, because the processes haven't caught up with the Act and it takes time to embed, then they won't be charged with that post-separation, but it will come. It will come. Okay, next slide, please. So just to put this in around some stats, always good to have some stats. The main one I think we wanted to highlight here was where it says on the bottom right, 77% of children in need assessments have found factors identified contributed to the child being in need. Of those, over half, so 51%, were domestic abuse. So 51% of child in need assessments with additional factors were domestic abuse. If we put that with only 3.2 are referred to MARAC, only 3.4 referrals are made to IDFA services, so like ESDAS. There's a discrepancy in the actual number that we know that are out there and actually what's been referred in or what's been dealt with in terms of the domestic abuse. So we end up with these children living in these neglect environments without the domestic abuse being identified. Next slide, please. And this is just something that came out of plain sight research, highlighting that really that we all notice it when it's high risk and when it's a bit out there and obvious. It's the ones that go under the radar that, you know, that's the tip of the iceberg. Many thousands more live daily with lower level domestic abuse, and a strong relationship has already been shown between the maltreatment of children in the home and domestic abuse of a parent. So you can look at that bit of research further if you want to. Next slide, please. And this is just to give you the idea of the framework of training that we would recommend everybody go onto everything, obviously. So there's some statutory stuff at the beginning where there's an expectation that within 3 months and 6 months of joining in Surrey, that the first two are completed. And then the other ones are choice as to what you want to do. I personally do the DA, the impact on children and parenting capacity. I deliver that one. ESDAS are involved in all of them, and they're part and parcel of all of those trainings. So please look out for them. They're free, you know, easy to get onto. At the moment, they're online, but I think we're back in the classroom idea as of next year. All been well. Next slide, please. And this is just to highlight, you know, well, where do I go to? If I need to talk to somebody, if I need to refer, where do I go? So, you know, it was advertised at one point, I think, that we had a Surrey 24-hour helpline. It's not actually 24 hours. It's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 7 days a week. So just to let you know about that. So that's just there for your information. Next slide. I think we're there then. And it was just to leave you with a little pretty picture. So we really must try and understand what's going on before we judge and make those decisions that maybe aren't in the best interest of the family, and then we lose them, as per my case study. Thank you for listening.
We'll continue in just a moment, thank you.
Hello, I'm Alex Dovey and I'm the project manager for the Graded Care Profile 2 project in Surrey. And I'm here as part of your Lunch and Learn session to tell you a little bit about the Graded Care Profile 2 project and the neglect screening tool in Surrey. As you'll be aware, probably from your session today, neglect is a significant concern impacting on the lives of an estimated 1 in 10 children in the UK. And the challenges in identifying, assessing and intervening when a child is experiencing neglect are many. In Surrey, we know there is much more work to be done to better support neglected children, especially those experiencing chronic neglect and the cumulative harm that comes with this. As such, the Graded Care Profile 2 and the shorter neglect screening tool are being introduced and embedded into practice across Surrey Children's Services, health, education and voluntary sector partners. The GCP2, Graded Care Profile 2, is a licensed tool developed by the NSPCC, meaning practitioners have to be trained and licensed to use it. The tool has a comprehensive framework that requires practitioners to gather evidence and from this evidence measure the quality of care that a child is receiving using a grading scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the best care to 5 being the worst. This tool has been shown to help reduce subjectivity, bias and ambiguity, which we see so often in assessments relating to cases of neglect. It also helps us to answer that tricky question of what good enough care looks like, and to also compare and measure change over time, which in turn informs us about the support and interventions that are required and successful to support the child and family. The tool can be used, and we'd encourage it to be used across the partnership from universal through to specialist services, so that we can help families as early as possible when concerns of neglect start emerging, and hopefully therefore prevent children from experiencing significant harm as a result. But where professionals from Universal and Early Help Services complete a GCP2, and this results in concerns of moderate or severe neglect, then the GCP2 should be used to support the request for support to Surrey's Children's Single Point of Access. Practitioners can use the tool individually, but it also lends itself well to be used by multiple partners within existing structures such as Team Around the Family and core groups. When multi-agency teams use the tool, a holistic and detailed picture of the child's lived experience can be gained, helping professionals to take the most appropriate action together to improve outcomes for the child and the family. So if you're interested in attending a Graded Care Profile 2 training, please book your place on one of the many upcoming courses via Olive. In particular, we'd like to see as many social workers, family support workers, health visitors, home link workers, designated safeguarding leads, inclusion officers, school nurses and youth workers attend. If you're from a partner agency who has limited contact with children and families, then it's unlikely you'll be able to use the GCP2 in its entirety, which is why we've developed a shorter and briefer neglect screening tool too. This tool can be downloaded from the Safeguarding Children's Partnership website by anyone, and it can help you to identify whether neglect may be present in a family that you come into contact with and what to do as a result. This tool can also be used as part of your evidencing of concerns when making a referral to Surrey's single point of access. We cannot continue simply doing what we're doing currently when it comes to those children who are experiencing neglectful care. So we really hope and believe that these tools will help you to help more children who are experiencing neglect, both earlier and with a more sustained impact. So if you're interested in either GCP2 or the neglect screening tool, please have a look at the Surrey Safeguarding Children's Partnership website, or please speak to myself, Alex Dovey, for more details. Thanks very much.
Thank you all for joining us today. We do apologise for the technical hitch that didn't allow us to play Michelle's video, but if you'd like to watch, you can put in Michelle's story on YouTube. We hope you will take something from the session today into your daily practice and for ongoing discussion to improve your awareness and work around childhood neglect. We will leave you with 3 slides from the Surrey Children's Services Academy that details the learning offer, including workshops on neglect. Any further questions can be directed to the partnership team inbox, details in the Q&A chat. And the recordings from these lunch and learn sessions will be downloaded and available to view on the SSCP website. Thank you very much.